welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Excuse me. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, December 5th around here, and we have a great show for you today. It is all about picks today. We will get into the SEC Championship to start things off. Then we'll move over to the Big Ten Championship, a huge game between Oregon and Penn State. We'll get to the ACC one, maybe the most impactful championship of them all. Definitely could knock Bama out of the race if Clemson were to win. And then we'll finish it off with the Arizona State-Iowa State game, a huge one in the Big 12 that will decide one of the playoff spots. One will be in, one will be out. And then we'll get to the biggest questions as we head into the CFP. A lot of different things that I want to talk about, including, is Bama still Bama? Are they still the team that just needs a foot in the dance and then they can really make some noise? So definitely something to watch there, and we'll get into that throughout the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible for you all, so definitely drop any questions you have in the comments, and we can definitely get to them as soon as possible. But let's go ahead and jump into this one, because it's a special one. There's no two ways about that. It is the only rematch on the board this weekend, other than UNLV Boise State. The only rematch in the Power Four at the very least. But it's a huge one. Georgia's trying to do the exact same thing they were able to do in Austin earlier this year. Went in, got 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, got a 15-point win. Totally dominated that game pretty much from start to finish. Texas made a little bit of a push late in the second half, but for the most part, that was Georgia's game. They owned it. They dominated it. So this is something that Texas trying to flip the script. Georgia's trying to do essentially the exact same thing, and they're in kind of their second home in Mercedes-Benz, about 10 minutes from me, actually. But the one thing that I will say about this game is I think both teams are better right now than they were when they first faced off, and I think it comes down to one factor for for either team, where when you walked into that game back on October 19th with Carson Beck, you were thinking, okay, if he can avoid mistakes, we have to feel really good about this game. He wasn't able to. He threw 3 picks in that game, really struggled to see the field effectively, made a lot of mistakes, had a couple of plays where Texas just made a great play, but also missed a couple of guys that he should not have missed. It was one of those games where he just kind of was a little bit all over the place. He's not that way anymore. He's had 11 touchdowns, 0 picks in his last 3 games. He's been absolutely perfect over the last little bit, and that's a huge factor going in Georgia's direction. For Texas, I think it comes down to the run game. It was not a scary group when they first met. It was one of those groups where you can really pin your ears back and get after this offensive line, because you didn't have to worry about the run game all that much. You were allowed to commit more guys to the pass rush because the run game was not going to burn you. Now you have Trey Wisner, who's gone for over 150 yards in back-to-back weeks, has set career highs in back-to-back weeks, and is a very dangerous runner. The offensive line is absolutely rolling. The one question for this offensive line going into this game is Kelvin Banks is still a little bit up in the air for this game, the very talented left tackle that they have. Trevor Gooseby did come in against A&M and did an incredible job, so hopefully, regardless of what happens, they will be fine at that offensive line position, but that is a very impactful player. That is a player that, if you have a younger guy out there, there's more that Kirby Smart can do to someone like that than someone like Kelvin Banks. So definitely someone that Texas wants on the field on Saturday, but could leave a little bit of an opening where maybe Trevor Gooseby has to go, and then Georgia's edge rushers that we saw last time could maybe feast just a little bit more than they would be able to against Kelvin Banks. So that's definitely something that I'm watching very closely. And I think when you're talking about this offensive line, you got to talk about Quinn Ewers. You got to talk about that injury that he's dealing with right now, the high ankle sprain that kind of hobbled him a little bit against A&M, had a little bit of a scoot, which was very nice to see. So I think he's feeling more than fine to play this game. The question is, how effective will he be? And the question is, how well can he move? I think he did a great job against A&M early. I also think there's a number of things that Georgia can do that maybe A&M wasn't quite as capable of doing. So the question is, if Georgia is able to stop the run the way they did the first time around, where Texas had 27 carries, 29 yards on the ground, there's almost no chance this is going to go well for someone like Quinn Ewers, who is still hobbled with an injury, is still going to be attacked from every direction from this pass rush. If he doesn't have a run game to complement him, it's going to be really, really tough to figure this out. On the Georgia side for the run game is another big-time question, where last time you had Trevor Etienne, and he was a huge player in this game, had 3 touchdowns, over 100 total yards, was a huge player for Georgia in this one, and he likely will not go on Saturday. I believe is questionable on the injury report right now, but I expect him not to go in this one. they'll have to have other guys step up. Roderick Robinson should be a little bit more healthy than he was a week ago. Nate Frazier continues to get better as his season goes on, but definitely something to watch as you get a little bit closer to this thing where you have two run games that Texas seems to be trending in the right direction, Georgia seems to be trending in the wrong one, and could that have a huge effect on this game where maybe Georgia can't pin their ears back quite as much as they want to. Maybe Texas can't do that or is able to stop the run a little bit more effectively than they were the first time around. So a lot of different things going into this one. And then you add the quarterback run game into this where maybe Texas unlocks Arch Manning just a little bit. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But these teams feel like they can win national titles. You know, Georgia's one of those teams that has been pretty up and down this year and has been a little bit hard to get a beat on. Definitely a team that you can bet on or not bet on. I fully understand it either way. I think they are a team that has that top-end capability. We saw it the first time they played in Austin. We could see it on Saturday, and then they just go on their merry way to win a national title. On the other side of that is these two teams have that bottom-out effect. They have that game where everything looks a little bit out of whack. Georgia had it against Kentucky and Ole Miss. Texas has had it against Georgia earlier in the year where things just look weird. So it's one of those matchups where you could get a number of different things, frankly. I think that you could get so many different things, but the way that I look at it right now, I think these two teams are playing better football than they were when they came in the last time around. I think the Georgia defense is a question mark going into this one, but you have a hobbled quarterback, you have an offensive line that might be dealing with some injuries. Maybe Georgia can jump into this thing, and then we'll have to see how it affects the CFP. Could UGA drop below Ohio State with a loss? Could Texas jump to the number 1 seed if Oregon were to fall, or would they drop to Notre Dame spot, or would they drop to UGA spot with a loss? So a lot of different things to talk about in terms of the CFP. We'll get into some of the hypotheticals tomorrow, actually, but I wanted to get into some players to watch here really quickly. And we'll start with Nate Frazier. We talked about it. It's likely that Trevor Etienne is not going to go in this game. You need someone to pick up the slack, and Nate Frazier is likely going to be that guy, one way or the other. He is a huge player, played really well last time they were in this building at the beginning of the year against Clemson, so has to feel relatively comfortable where he's playing, but definitely a player that is going to be huge for this title run for Georgia, where he's probably going to be carrying most of the weight. I think Roderick Robinson will take a little bit off of that more and more as the season goes on, but this is a huge player. One way or the other, he's going to have to make a ton of plays, and if he can't, then this Georgia defense is going to be really hard for Carson Beck to deal with. And then you got Mykel Williams on the defensive side of the ball for UGA. This is the guy that can totally change this game because he's not just a pure pass rusher. He is a guy that can get after the passer plenty, but he absolutely is very good in the run game as well. And I think when you look at a number of the different things that I think Texas is going to break out, I think he's going to have to be very disciplined. I think he's going to have to keep his feet still, make sure that he's parallel to the line of scrimmage, and then be able to chase down the quarterback or the running back. And the reason I say that is I think Arch Manning is going to have an effect in this game. I think he's going to have an impact. I think that moment right there is going to have an impact where you have that mesh concept and you got to figure out if he's going to pull it or he's going to keep it. And that is not an easy thing to do. It keeps a lot of these athletes that Georgia has at bay. It's not something that Texas had the first time around, and especially not something that you had where you were really scared of the running back that was getting the ball. Now Trey Wisner is definitely guys that Georgia is going to be at least cognizant of, at least a little bit worried about, and definitely one of those moments where maybe Arch Manning can be a huge factor in this game. We saw what Haynes King can do. Arch Manning's got plenty of athletic ability to do that as well. So definitely something to watch. I think he will have an impact on this game running the ball just because the opening is there against this Georgia defense. And then Andrew Makuba. He had an incredible game the first time these two played, made a ridiculous pick on the first one for Carson Beck in that game, and was really remarkable and has been ever since. He's been one of the best players on the back end for this Texas defense, has been one of the best players on Texas' team overall for the last little bit. So when you talk about this game, there's so many different things that have to happen for Texas, but the biggest thing is you got to confuse Carson Beck. One way or the other, you have to find a couple of mistakes from him, and this back end's going to have their hands full, Andrew Makuba especially, with a couple of these tight ends that they like to play. He's going to have to get a couple of man coverage concepts, and it'll be interesting to see if he can handle all of that. But definitely a couple of players that I think are going to have huge impacts on this game, but there are obviously plenty more of them. I do think Arch Manning is going to be a huge one to watch, but some keys to the game for Texas. Just play mistake-free football. They are incredibly hard to stop when they don't help you stop them, when they don't get penalties and turnovers and things that end drives earlier than they should. They are an incredibly hard team to stop. They have one of the best offensive lines in the country, have playmakers all over the field where you just have to get it in their hands and let them go to work. They have a running game that is now officially terrifying. they can do a lot of really special things offensively. They can't do them if they're turning the ball over. We saw it against A&M. It was domination until they gave that pick six away, until they fumbled. It felt like Texas was going to run away with that game, win 31-0 or something. They allowed them back in that game. You have to be very careful, and if you make a couple of those mistakes, the offense on the other side is going to be more potent than what you had against A&M last week. But the other part of this is force one-dimensional football. One way or the other, you have to find a way to slow down this run game, and it's been relatively easy to for a lot of the teams that this Georgia team has played, especially without Trevor Etienne. They're all the way near 100 in the country in rush yards per game. It's going to be really tough for them to get it going in if Texas is able to kind of plug that inside. They played really, really well. Those defensive tackles in Verdon Broughton and Alfred Collins have been absolute units. If they can play a big-time game here and force them to be one-dimensional, maybe Carson Beck starts forcing into those windows that he's been really good about not forcing it into the last couple of weeks. And then you're at home, but you're on the road. Texas is technically the home team in this game. Atlanta's Georgia country. I grew up in Atlanta. I'm about 10 minutes from Mercedes-Benz right now. Atlanta is Georgia country. They will be technically in enemy territory going into that game. It's going to be a really, really tough environment to kind of stick around in to make sure that you are totally even-keeled in. It's going to be very interesting to see what Texas does in this game where, yes, you are the home team, but I promise you, you are going to be on the road in this game. And then keys to the game for Georgia. It's going to be a change of approach. There's no doubt about that. The Texas run game is a real factor in this game like it wasn't when they first played. They have to make sure they have Trey Wisner in their sights. They have to make sure that they don't get caught by any quarterback run game or any concepts like that. And then on top of that, you got to make sure that your back end is fully set in this game. You got to make sure that you're not getting beat over the top. You got to make sure that you're not getting beat just on normal routes where guys can run around you, because that was a problem in the Georgia Tech game. Texas got some better athletes than Georgia Tech does. So you have to be very careful if you're Georgia. Definitely change the approach a little bit, not just pin your ears back and go after Quinn Ewers with the pass rush. And then high percentage throws. We talked about it. This back end is different than just about anything that Georgia has faced in quite some time, really since they faced this back end, if I'm being totally honest. But you look at a Florida team where he made a couple of mistakes. That is a very capable linebacker group that can drop back into coverage. I think Tennessee is a group that you can probably attack a little bit more on that back end. So while he's had incredible games and he's played really good football, you got to make sure you don't get ahead of yourself. You got to make sure you don't start forcing it into those tight windows. You don't start doing some relatively dangerous stuff. Trust your arm, of course. It's one of the best arms in the country, but definitely be cognizant of all these back-end players and the fact that they can make plays that can totally change a game in a hurry. And then they do have the special teams edge. This could be a huge one if it's a close game late in it, and Texas has really struggled in the kick and punt game this year. Georgia has not. They've been one of the best in the country in both categories. It could be a huge factor in this game. If it comes down to it, you have to make a kick late. Georgia's going to be more equipped to do that than Texas is. So definitely a lot of stuff going into this game. It is a rematch. It is going to have a lot of juice about it, and I think it's going to be a really fun one. I'm going to go with Texas. I think this run game is a huge factor in it. I think this defense, especially the defensive line, is playing as well as anyone in the country right now. I think it's just going to be too much. I think Texas has enough in this game. I think that run game with Trey Wisner is going to be a huge factor, and I do think Arch Manning with his legs is going to be a factor in this game. I think it'll be a little bit too much for Georgia. I'll pick Texas to win that one. I think it's going to be an awesome one down there in Atlanta. I'll pick Texas to win, possibly lock up that number one seed, depending on what happens in this next game that we'll talk about. Oregon against Penn State, a huge one over there in Indianapolis. Got to talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that rematch going on in Atlanta, Georgia this upcoming weekend. We have Texas against Georgia. I am going to pick Texas. I think it's going to be an awesome game. I do think Texas' run game will have enough of an impact where they'll be able to get the win there. But we do have the Big Ten Championship to talk about. Oregon versus Penn State, a game that I don't think any of us expected. I think we all were kind of preparing for an Ohio State versus Oregon rematch, get another rematch in this one. We didn't end up getting it. It's wide open for Penn State now. They have the opportunity to make a lot of noise in this conference, and the CFP factors are relatively interesting. I wonder, if Penn State were to lose by a touchdown, would they drop to Ohio State spot? They do have that loss against Ohio State. They would be 11-1. Ohio State would be 11-2. Excuse me. Ohio State would be 10-2. Could that be an argument that they have in that room? I probably would drop them to that spot if I'm being totally honest. So a lot of different debates there. Also, if they were to win and Texas were to win, would they jump up to the 1 seed because that win is a little bit more impressive? Would Oregon set at the 5 seed with a loss, or could they drop a little bit lower? And then a lot of different factors that go into this one. So I think when you look at the CFP, this obviously is not the most impactful. Both these teams are in. One is going to be a bye. One's going to be in a host position, but I think Penn State could kick around a little bit more than people are realizing, possibly even drop to that Ohio State spot with a loss. So a lot of different things going into this one, and I think when we get into this matchup, it's going to be a ton of fun because when you look at both these teams, they're going to attack you and they're going to be really, really aggressive when they do that. And it's kind of different styles where you have a Penn State team that does such a good job in between the numbers. They do such a good job with Tyler Warren and these running backs really hurting you and making big plays down the middle of the field, which is where Drew Aller is most dangerous. Then you have Oregon, who's a little bit more variant, a little bit more outside stuff with these special wide receivers that they have. And the thing about that is, it's probably going to help them in this game. Danny Dennis-Sutton and Zane Durant in the middle are absolute problems for this game. And when you have a run game where it's been very effective, and this offensive line, one of the very best in the country, is up for the Joe Moore Award right now. So you have a really good-on-good type matchup with this offensive line for Oregon, this defensive line for Penn State. It could just be that decides the game, one way or the other. If Jordan James cannot get that run game going, if Oregon does not get a consistent run game throughout this one, it could be a long day on the offensive side of the ball where maybe we just haven't seen Oregon, where they've had to kind of change their game plan, where they've had to kind of change the way that they go about business, and they did it relatively well in that Wisconsin game. Definitely had to adapt to a couple of different things. There's a lot more talent on this Penn State defense than there is on Wisconsin, and there's that really dangerous player, number 11, and Abdul Carter. So you talk about this game, I mean, there's so many difference makers all across the field for Oregon. Maybe the biggest difference maker in the entire game is Abdul Carter. He's a guy that can totally take over it, has 10 sacks on the year, could easily make it 2 more on Saturday. He's an absolute beast. Now, he is going to go up against one of the best offensive lines, particularly one of the best duos of offensive tackles in the entire country. Josh Connerly and Johnny Cornelius are absolutely elite in every sense. It's going to be a battle. It might just be one of the biggest battles in this game where you have one-on-one. Whoever wins that battle every single down is going to put their team in a really, really good position to win. And I think Abdul Carter is one of those players where it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be super pretty for Penn State. If number 11 is going to make a play late in this game, you have a lot of margin for error in the sense that not a lot of people do against Oregon, but you definitely have a little bit more margin for error because you have the foundation. You have the 2 running backs, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, number 23 in the country in rush yards per game. You have the ability at the front of your defense and your defensive line. You have a ton of guys on that back end, including Jalen Reed, that can make some plays. You have that baseline that not a lot of teams have, that Ohio State did have walking into this game against Oregon, and it was obviously a really, really tough one. So the question is, I think when you talk about Penn State in general and going into this game in general, and really kind of the rest of the way, if I'm being totally honest, Nick Singleton is probably the most important player on that team, as far as I'm concerned. When you talk about players against Oregon that have had success, running backs have had relative success. Now, it's the best duo they've played definitely since Ohio State, and Ohio State had some success running the ball, over 4 yards per carry, and then Ashton Genty all the way back in August, I believe, or September, 230 yards against Oregon. Obviously, they've tightened some things up since then, but Nick Singleton will likely be one of the best, maybe the best running back they've faced since then. it's going to be a load to deal with. There's no doubt about that, and that's probably the way Penn State's going to have to win this game. You're probably not going to beat Oregon deep, at least consistently. You'll be able to get a couple of plays if I had to imagine, but when you talk about this Penn State offense, it's more about just staying on schedule. It's more about making the play right in front of you, getting it to Tyler Warren, getting it to these running backs, and letting them make plays and not really pushing the ball downfield. Well, I don't want to say that. They definitely do push the ball downfield a relative good amount. They've kind of pulled away from that just a little bit throughout the year, so it's definitely going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. For Penn State, it's probably going to be the run game that decides this one way or the other. For Oregon, it's probably going to be the pass game, if we're being totally honest. Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson are absolute problems on the outside, and Penn State, they're 7th in the country in pass yards allowed per game, so another good-on-good matchup. Frankly, everything on the Oregon offense and the Penn State defense is going to be a good-on-good matchup. I am a little bit worried about that Penn State back end against these elite athletes, against the speed that they have at Oregon, but I do think that's a really good group. I do think it's a group that absolutely can hold up at least enough against this elite group of wide receivers. But I think when you talk about Oregon, I already talked about this going into a couple of different matchups throughout the year, where Jordan James is probably the most important player on that team, where you can get all the guys spread out and play all insane things on the outside with those wide receivers. You have you have a guy in the backfield in Jordan James, as well as Noah Whittington back there, that can make a lot of big time plays. And when I think when I talk about Oregon, there's so much of this air of they got to make that big play. They got to hit the deep one over the middle of the field. They got to hit that deep crosser, or they're not going to be successful. If they can get that 3 yards, then 4 yards, then 3 more yards, it's going to be a ton for Penn State to deal with. And this offensive line especially is going to be able to lean on this defensive line just a little bit more aggressively. So this is going to be an incredible matchup. I think there's so much good on good in this matchup that it's kind of hard to see a really aggressive edge one way or the other. Definitely going to be a really incredible one to watch. And Penn State was given a massive opportunity by Michigan last week. They were given the chance. They don't have to worry about missing the playoffs. You get to win a big game here. You can possibly kind of change the narrative around Penn State this year. Say, we are a team that can compete with the elite teams in the country, not just one that got a little bit lucky to find their way into the Big Ten championship, and now is kind of playing with house money. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens there. For Oregon, you've been the best team pretty much the entire year. You've been one of the best teams in the country, and you're the only undefeated team in the FBS. Your season just started over, though. You know, that 12-0 is all great. Now it's just about winning the game in front of you, beating Penn State, moving forward into that CFP, and being the team to beat there. So going to be an incredible matchup, and I think Trayshawn Holden is someone you're going to want to watch in this game, because we talked about Evan Stewart, we talked about Tez Johnson. They are going to be issues, and frankly, I think there are going to be problems all over the field. Trayshawn Holden can make that game-changing play. He can make the play downfield that totally changes the complexion and totally changes the way that Penn State has to attack this game, which is not at all what Penn State wants to do. They want to stay on the schedule. They want to make sure that they're making the play right in front of them, and they don't have to push the ball downfield, at least excessively. They love to make those plays downfield, don't get me wrong, but they don't necessarily want to do it every single play. They don't want to have to push it 15 yards downfield and then go right back to that where you have to find Omari Evans or find Harrison Wallace on the outside. And the way that starts is really the Oregon offense. If they're able to put pressure on Penn State and make a couple of big time plays, then maybe Penn State has to totally throw away their game plan and think of something different. And then Jamari Caldwell, the very talented defensive tackle for Oregon. Penn State's going to run the ball. One way or the other, they're going to have to find a way to run the ball in this game. If they can't do it in between the tackles, it's going to be a really long day. Not to say that they don't have the athletes on the outside to make some plays, but it is to say if they don't have that run game rolling, and if they don't have it moving downhill, and they don't have that offensive line being able to get push, it's going to be one of those days where Drew Aller just has to make all the plays in the world. That has not gone all that well for Penn State in the past. If he is going to do that, though, Omari Evans is going to be a huge player for him. He is a massive player, definitely a guy that kind of showed up a little bit late in the season, has been a big-time player for them the last couple of weeks, and when I look at this game, Penn State just needs a difference maker on the outside. They need a guy, whether it's Harrison Wallace or Omari Evans or Julian Fleming. They need someone to take attention. They need someone to make sure that number 44 can get open, because that is your game changer. That is a guy that can totally flip this thing on its head. Omari Evans is kind of just the supplemental piece to make sure that stuff opens up. And then you got A.J. Harris on the back end of that Penn State defense. I talked about it. I'm a little bit worried about the corners for Penn State in this game. I think they're plenty talented to handle the business. These athletes are different. The speed of these guys are different. The route running of these guys are different. So are they going to be able to hold up? And if anyone is, it's probably going to be A.J. Harris. Maybe a couple of big-time plays from him against Evan Stewart or against Tez Johnson can be the difference in this one. But some keys to the game, especially for Oregon, I think you attack this back end. I'll be totally honest. I don't think there's a back end really in the country that can fully slow down this Oregon passing attack. Now, there's definitely some that are a little bit more equipped, and I think the Penn State one is a little bit more towards that. Now, they did give up over 300 yards passing to USC. They did give up a couple of big-time plays to Ohio State. So maybe there's that opening for Oregon, and frankly, they're a scarier pass offense than both of those. So it's definitely going to be really interesting to see what Penn State can do in this game. And if you're Oregon, I think I would just trust my guys. You have two of the best receivers in the country. I would just let them do their thing on the outside. And then on the other side, I would trust my corners against their wide receivers because I don't think they have many game changers there. I think they have good players in Harrison Wallace and Omari Evans and a couple other guys. They don't have game changers. They do at running back. They do at tight end. You got to make sure you have guys to cover all of those guys. Worry about those guys first. Worry about Nick Singleton on Katron Allen and Tyler Warren, and then worry about everyone else. And then get to the wide receivers because the reality is you're probably going to be able to win a lot of these one-on-ones when you have Jabbar Muhammad on the outside with these wide receivers. It's all about stopping number 44 and those two running backs. And then the mental toughness of the team is going to be tested on Saturday and really throughout the rest of the season because they've been incredible at it. The first part of this year, we've seen a couple of those speeches from Dan Lanning, been absolutely incredible to watch. But it's definitely one of those things where everything gets a little bit tougher here. Everything gets a little bit more tight. Everything gets a little bit more calculated in. You got to be a little bit more mentally tough. It's going to be a huge test for this team that has been in these situations, has played in a Pac-12 championship, but this is a little bit different. This is a chance to win this one, be the team to beat in the CFP, and be a team that everyone's watching going forward as a program. So a huge one this Saturday, and I think just the mental toughness of Oregon is going to be tested this game and the rest of the way this year. And then for Penn State, throw the first punch. That is a huge part in this game because Oregon's been so good about staying on schedule, about doing things the way that they want to do them. Wisconsin got a little bit away from them. Ohio State, obviously, they had to make some adjustments, but the reality is they've been playing their game pretty much the entire year. If Penn State were to throw the first punch, get up 7, get up 14, would Oregon get a little bit tight? Would we talk about that mental toughness where they haven't necessarily been in that situation, where they've been down in games, they haven't been kind of buried in games early? So it's definitely something to watch where maybe Penn State can throw that first punch, get up by 14, and then Oregon panics just a little bit like they haven't this year, and then eliminate big plays. That's all you have to do. Make sure these wide receivers are in front of you. Make sure you tackle them when they get the ball because they're nightmares. They're one of those teams that it's a game where you are never safe. Even if you're up 14 early in this game, one play from Evan Stewart, one play from Tez Johnson can totally change this thing. You got to keep these guys in front of you. Do everything you can to keep them in front of you. Do everything you can to make them earn that 5 yards, that 10 yards on third down. And if they can't, then you have a really good opening there. So I think when you talk about this Oregon team, they have every ability to sustain drives, to do the thing where they get 3 yards, then 3 yards, then 4 yards. But they're not going to do it overly consistently. And that's definitely a way to get them off schedule where you eliminate those big-time plays. And then seize the opportunity. You were given an opening by Michigan last week. You just got to kick the door down now. You have a chance to be the number 1 seed in the CFP. You have a chance to be the team to beat as we head into this thing. It's a lot of pressure that comes with that, but James Franklin has an opportunity in front of them. Will he seize it? I tend to believe no. I really like this Penn State team. I really thought about possibly picking them here, but when I look at the wide receivers on the outside for Oregon, I think it's just going to be too much. I think Dylan Gabriel's legs are actually going to be a factor in this game with how good the Penn State defensive line is. So I think there's a lot of things going into this one. I just couldn't pick against that Oregon team right now. I wouldn't be surprised by any means if Penn State were able to pull it off, but the way I look at it right now, those Oregon wide receivers are going to be a problem, and I'm not sure Penn State has the firepower to keep in this game. So I'm going to pick Oregon in that one. I'll pick 2 new champions in Texas and Oregon to win their conference in the very first year, but now it's time to get to the ACC championship, maybe the most impactful in terms of the CFP this upcoming weekend, and we'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Big Ten matchup between Penn State and Oregon. Going to be a huge one. I am going to go with the Ducks in that one. I think it's going to be a battle back and forth, but can't necessarily pick against the firepower that Oregon offense has. But let's get into the ACC. Let's talk about SMU against Clemson. A huge game over there, and definitely one that could have a lot of CFP impacts one way or the other, where I've made my take known on here. If SMU is left out really under any circumstance other than getting blown out 45-0, teams will dodge title games. You cannot do that. You have to let them in. I think it's going to be one of those very contentious conversations as we get to Selection Sunday, but this could be the most impactful game of the bunch in this upcoming weekend where you have a lot of different implications. Maybe SMU can get a bye. Maybe SMU could fall all the way out of the field with a loss. So a lot of different things to talk about. Bama will be watching this game very, very closely, and we'll be cheering for SMU very, very hard, and Clemson fans would love to bury Bama hopes just one more time. But let's get into the actual matchup here, and I think when you talk about this matchup, it'll be kind of a battle of style. It's not necessarily going into this game the way that I view it, a battle of styles, but the openings that these defenses give you, you're definitely going to want to do it. So you have SMU. They're one of the best run defenses in the country. 9th in the country in rush yards allowed. They are 92nd in pass defense. Or Clemson is a little bit more consistent passing the ball. Not necessarily the greatest offense in the world passing the ball, but 13th in the country. Definitely needs to get a little bit more of that down-to-down success. Has had those explosive plays downfield, has had a tough time kind of stringing together drives, and that will be a huge part of this game, trying to find whatever run game you can. Will Phil Maffa only went for 66 yards against South Carolina. Cade Klubnik's legs were a factor in that game, but SMU is one where if you're not able to get a ton of push on that inside and you're not able to get at least a little bit of room, this Clemson offense is going to have a tough time really getting their feet under him in this game and really being able to attack downfield the way that they want to. But I do think it's an interesting thing to watch here where the SMU defense, I feel like people still don't give it the respect that it probably deserves. Especially the front seven is a very, very good unit. And I think when you look at this Clemson team where Phil Maffa is not playing well, when he is not necessarily on his game and not being the big-time factor that he can be, this Clemson offense is fine. It's not necessarily special, it's not necessarily dangerous, and it's definitely not one where the defense has to make all types of adjustments. They can pretty much play the game that they have to play right in front of them. Don't necessarily have to switch around too many things. It will be a huge test for SMU, maybe the biggest of the season on the defensive side of the ball, but they have the dudes to take care of it. There's no doubt about that. If Clemson is able to get that run game going just a little bit, they're able to open those big plays downfield, things open up in a hurry. That's definitely where this thing could get a little bit sketchy. And talking about the quarterbacks, that's going to be a huge factor in this game, is going to be their legs, one way or the other. Both these quarterbacks are plenty capable of running the ball. Cade Klubnik has more rushing yards this season, but Kevin Jennings is more than capable of absolutely making you hurt with his legs, and they've been really incredible since a couple of not so great games throughout the year. And Cade Klubnik really didn't have a great game against South Carolina, but he does have 12 total touchdowns, 2 INTs in the last 5 games. He's been really, really good. He's been a quarterback that has really kind of surged towards the late parts of the season, and more than anything is not giving the ball away. When you have that good of a defense on the other side and you have the ability to kind of make those big plays downfield, not giving the ball away is the most important thing. Cade Klubnik's been absolutely incredible at doing that. And then for Kevin Jennings, since that disaster of a game against Duke where they were able to escape, just miraculously were able to escape, he's had 10 total touchdowns, 2 INTs in the last 4 games. He's completed 68% of his passes in all 4 games. So he is as dialed in as you possibly could want him to be. This will be his biggest test for a defense that he is going to face, no doubt about that. The athletes that are on the other side are just a little bit different than a lot of the things that he has faced throughout his career. So a lot of different things to kind of go into this game, and SMU is definitely going to have to kind of meet that challenge. And it's something that I feel like is kind of around this game as we get a little bit closer to it. It's this air of, well, this is Clemson and it's SMU. Come on, it's Clemson and it's SMU. It's going to be Clemson. Clemson's going to be able to win this game. And I get that sentiment. And frankly, I'm having a tough time not following into that as well. But I do think SMU has some guys on the offensive line with some size. You talk about Logan Parr, a very talented offensive lineman, one of the better ones in the entire ACC. The thing is, on the other side is TJ Parker. On the other side is Peter Woods. It's not guys that you might have a physical advantage over. You definitely don't against these guys. These guys are absolute beasts. They're total problems off the edge, and they're going to have to be really effective. For the SMU D-line, that might be a bigger question because you do have Clemson. They have 300-pound guys all across their offensive line. SMU has about one or two on their defensive line here or there. It's not necessarily an elite group in terms of size. It is an elite group in terms of athleticism. They absolutely have the ability to take on a bigger guy and get around him and make a play on the ball carrier, but it will be a different battle. It will be a little bit bigger of guys. It will be a little bit longer. They will have the ability to get their hands on you a little bit quicker and then be forceful with them. So a lot of different things going into this game for SMU, and I think it's one of those battles where you've played incredible football. You've played really tough football for the first parts of this year. This is going to be a totally different challenge. If you played Miami earlier in the year and were able to win, maybe I'd feel a little bit better about this phenomenon, but you do look at that Clemson team compared to that SMU team. When they walk out of the locker room, they just look a little bit different. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Clemson's going to win. It just means Clemson gets a certain level of athlete that SMU's not quite to getting. They absolutely will be getting in a couple of years, I have to imagine, but definitely one of those games where it's going to be a lot of different things happening. It's going to be a battle in the middle if SMU can win it. It's going to be one of those, can you live up to that challenge? Can you live up to that physicality? But the reality is, when you talk about this game, the physicality is going to be a huge part of it. Explosive play metric is probably going to be where this thing is decided, one way or the other. Both these teams can push the ball downfield. Clemson has struggled a little bit to stop that big-time play, so maybe SMU can find some of the openings that some of the other teams have been able to find, including South Carolina last week against Clemson, and really kind of open this thing up. But overall, I think coming into this game, Clemson was given a second life. They were given a chance to win a game, get into the CFP, and kind of spoil the fun for Alabama possibly. So a lot of things going into this game, and I think when you talk about Clemson overall, this is one that they probably don't deserve, if we're being totally honest. No disrespect to Clemson. They played really good football this year, but the reality is, if Miami was just able to take care of business last week, they would be in this thing. Clemson's been given a shot. Now it's time to kick the door down and see what happens. And then for SMU, you're in a really, really good spot. You're trying to join Texas. You're trying to join Oregon as the winners of new conferences. Now the issue is you got to prove a lot of people wrong, and you got to make sure that that committee doesn't look at you a little bit differently after this game. You got to make sure that win or loss, you are in that thing. I wish I could say that it's confident that you're going to be, but it's going to be really interesting to watch all of that unfold. And some players to watch. Jordan Hudson is going to be a problem in this game. A wide receiver for SMU. Since RJ Maryland has gone down, it's been a little bit more kind of by committee in the wide receiver and tight end room space. You have Roderick Daniels making a ton of plays. Jordan Hudson is the athlete on this team. He's the absolute difference maker, was a 5-star coming out of high school, is going to be one of those guys that can be a problem for Avian Terrell and a lot of these guys on the back end for Clemson. And then Kobe Wilson, one of the leaders of this defense, one of the guys that can be an absolute problem for Clemson. And you talked about Ahmad Walker, that other linebacker with them. One of the best linebacker duos in the entire country. They absolutely can make Clemson hurt. They absolutely can slow down Phil Maffa, who's another huge player in this game where Clemson has to get a run game going one way or the other. They cannot afford to play this game the same way they played South Carolina because you have a difference maker at quarterback again in Kevin Jennings. You have guys on the outside that can make some plays again. So you have a team on the other side that is going to cause some problems for you. If you can get Phil Maffa going, if you can get his feet under him, it's going to be a problem for SMU to deal with, and maybe a couple of those big plays over the middle of the field will really open up. And then Sammy Brown. He's been so impressive the last little bit. The linebacker, the freshman for Clemson, he's been really, really impressive. And when you talk about really the entire linebacker group, they're going to have to run down Kevin Jennings quite a bit in this game. One way or the other, they're going to have to make plays on him, and Sammy Brown's going to be a huge part of that effort. And then keys to the game. For SMU, you got to handle the emotions. It's a lot going into this game, and there's probably a little bit of anger in that locker room with the way that they feel like they're being talked about in the CFP race. You got to handle all of that. You got to make sure that you go in with a totally clear eyes and not worry about all of that type of stuff, because it's relatively easy to worry about that stuff. So definitely going to be put the test into a team that is very comfortable in this position in Clemson. And then Kevin Jennings. The Clemson linebackers are really incredible. You got to make sure you hold them at bay. And the best way to do that is make sure they hesitate in that quarterback run game. I think Kevin Jennings is just always a threat to pull it and go 60 yards. So one of those very interesting game plans where maybe SMU leans on that a little bit more than they have in the past couple of games. And then no big pass plays. Just make sure that Clemson has to earn everything that they get. I don't think they're capable of doing that offensively. I don't think they're capable of putting together a 14-play drive late in the season and making sure that they get a 7 points out of it. So eliminate some big plays downfield. Make sure that you can kind of pin this offense in, and they probably won't be all that successful, frankly. And then the keys to the game for Clemson, consistent run game. They weren't able to find it last weekend. You just have to find it one way or the other. Whether it's Jay Haynes or Phil Maffa or Cade Klubnik, you got to make sure that you're able to move the chains on a 3rd and 3, on a 4th and 2, where you have that run game to go back to. If you're getting pushed around all day up front, it's going to be a really, really long day for this offense. And then you do have a physicality advantage. One way or the other, you just have bigger dudes. So you have a Peter Woods, you have a TJ Parker, you have guys up front that are going to be problems for you on the offensive line. Can you kind of just impose your will? Can you lean on this team just a little bit more than you were able to a South Carolina or a couple of the other teams you played, and definitely impose your will just a little bit more and definitely open a couple of doors in that pass game and then kick the door down? You've been given an opportunity that maybe you don't deserve, if I'm being totally honest, but you have it. One way or the other, you have the chance to walk into that stadium, get a win, move on to the CFP. You just got to kick the door down and make sure that you play the game that you are very comfortable playing in this building. And frankly, I think they're going to do it. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know what this game looks like. I think it's going to be a little bit all over the place. I think Clemson's going to get it done. I think they're very comfortable in this spot. I think Dabo Swinney's going to have them ready to roll, and I think they get the win. I kind of hate to say it. I think this should keep SMU in. I think a 3-point loss, if it knocks SMU out, I have some big problems. I'll be totally honest with you. So a lot of different things to kind of go into this one, and it's going to be a really, really fun game, and we'll have plenty of an impact on what the CFP looks like on Sunday. But a lot of different things going on in this game, and I believe Anthony had a question over here. Yeah, it's kind of walking a tightrope when you talk about the CFP committee around this time of year, because you have to wonder, do you measure recent stuff a little bit more aggressively? Do you take the whole body of work and take the full 12 weeks into account? It's a total toss-up to me. I've always leaned a little bit more towards Bama, but frankly, that's a total toss-up. I think you could have gone Miami, and I would have had no problem. You probably could have gone Ole Miss or South Carolina, and I wouldn't have had a problem. So that's just kind of what the 12-team playoff brings you. You bring a couple of teams that are relatively flawed one way or the other. You just got to figure out which one is most deserving. It's kind of a crapshoot, if I'm being totally honest. I do agree that maybe not quite enough emphasis was put on that Oklahoma game, but it's a battle back and forth, and I'm sure they had that battle for quite a few hours in that room. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about Arizona State, Iowa State, a very interesting game that doesn't necessarily have the implications where both teams could be in the playoff. That might just make it a little bit more intense, and we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the ACC Championship that's going on, Clemson against SMU. We'll have some interesting implications one way or the other for that CFP race. Could knock Alabama out, could have some different effects on who gets in and all that different stuff, and we'll see what happens on Selection Sunday, no doubt about that. But let's get into the Big 12 Championship. Let's talk about the picks and preview for this one, and it's a really fun one. It's one of my favorites of the entire weekend. You have an Arizona State team that has been incredible to watch really the entire year. You have Cam Skattebo that's been absolutely incredible, one way or the other. And I think you talk about this Arizona State team, it's really kind of a flip. About halfway through the season, they got a really big-time player, not necessarily back, but they really utilized him in a huge way, and that was Jordan Tyson. That was a wide receiver, 1,100-yard receiver, very, very talented guy, and he's officially out for this game. So the question is, who do they have to replace him? Are they able to find someone that can really replace that production? Because he is a huge factor. For Iowa State, they've done a great job just kind of holding steady. Where all the other Big 12 teams kind of imploded late in the season, they handled their business after a little bit of a blip to Kansas and Texas Tech about halfway through the year. But it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this one unfold. And then the biggest factor in this one is the biggest player in this game, one way or the other. It is going to be Cam Skattebo. He is so important in this game. And you look on the other sideline, you got a 94th rated run defense in the country. You have the ability to run on this team, or at least you should have the ability to run on this team, and especially with Jordan Tyson not playing, you're going to have to, one way or the other. Cam Skattebo has almost 1,400 yards this year, has gone over 140 yards, and has 3 scores in the last 3 games, or has 3 scores in the last 2 games, has 140 yards in the last 3. He's been remarkable. He's been the offense for a lot of the games that they've played, especially when Jordan Tyson went down last weekend. He was definitely a huge part of that performance, and a couple other wide receivers were as well. We'll get to them here in a second. So maybe it is just one of those games where Arizona State just has to commit to running the ball, one way or the other, whether it's Cam Skattebo or Sam Leavitt pulling the ball and getting out on the edge. There's a lot of different things that kind of fall into this, and I think when you talk about that run game overall, it's one that can totally take over a game. If Iowa State's able to totally sell out and stop it, maybe they have a little bit more success, and maybe the back end is not super worried about these wide receivers that they have on the outside. And then on the other side, it's going to be the pass game for Iowa State, likely one way or the other. I think Arizona State is a top 25 run defense. They are not nearly that for pass defense. They are absolutely towards the bottom in the country, and the Iowa State run game is good, not necessarily great. They are going to lean on the pass a little bit more aggressively in this game. Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, both have hit over 1,000 yards in this game. Both are big-time threats. One way or the other, they are absolute problems, and they're definitely going to need them. They're definitely going to need those one-on-one matchups if they're able to slow those guys down. If Arizona State is able to drop a ton of guys back into coverage and focus a little bit more on these wide receivers in this pass game, maybe that makes it a little bit tough for Iowa State to move the ball the way that they want to. So it'll be interesting. The defensive approach for both these teams will be fascinating. Does Iowa State commit a ton of guys to the box, make sure that they can slow down that run game, and then kind of make the pass game open up a couple of doors for Arizona State, and then vice versa? Does Arizona State drop a ton of guys back and then open a couple of doors for Iowa State running the ball, and then who can take advantage of that opening? It's going to be really, really fascinating to watch that unfold, and definitely will be kind of a chess match early in this game to figure out where everyone stands. And the other part of this is red zone is going to be a huge factor in this one, where you have Arizona State not necessarily all that great in the red zone, only converting 76% of their chances into points. You have Jordan Tyson. He was a 50-50 ball receiver. He was a guy that you could just kind of throw the ball up to. He was going to go make a play. You don't have that anymore. You have different guys that can make some plays in this one, but you're definitely going to be one of those teams that might just have to run the ball really effectively in the 20s, inside the 20s, as well as outside the 20s in this game. One way or the other, you're probably going to have to be a team that kind of imposes your will just a little bit on the offensive line and definitely gets a push, especially in the red zone, where you might just not have that receiver that you can kind of just go up to, let him make a play, and move on to the next down. And it's going to be one of those games, especially with Jordan Tyson out and especially with Iowa State having a little bit more pressure on the quarterback. These quarterbacks are going to be huge one way or the other. Sam Leavitt, to me, has been probably the second best quarterback in the entire conference. Maybe we could talk about Sawyer Robertson, but as of right now, I think he's been absolutely incredible. Rocco Becht has been incredible as well. Becht is over 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 8 picks. He's also been a factor on the ground with 7 touchdowns rushing, and Sam Leavitt had 350 on the ground, has 21 touchdowns, has been really, really incredible in this season, and has done a great job kind of just moving this offense down the field. Hasn't done necessarily anything spectacular, but definitely has been a factor in these games, and especially with Cam Skattebo, when you have to worry about him so aggressively, he is more than capable of pulling that ball, getting out on the edge, and making some plays with his legs. So this is a moment for both these programs, for both these head coaches. This is a huge moment where Iowa State, Matt Campbell has been in this point before. He has coached in the Big 12 championship. None of these players have played in it. That is for sure. Arizona State has not even gotten close, if I'm being totally honest. So it is going to be a battle. It is going to be kind of a life changer for some of these players. If Cam Skattebo goes out there and absolutely rolls in this game, the CFP and NFL teams will be all over him. There's no doubt about that. And then Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, the exact same thing. They can make some big time money in this game and definitely turn some heads on some NFL scouts. So it's going to be huge to watch this game. And I think both these teams love to control the clock. One way or the other, they love to kind of control. I believe both of them are top 10 in the country when it comes to controlling the clock in games. And both teams are able to run the ball. The question is, can Iowa State do that to this degree in this game when you have someone on the other side like Cam Skattebo? Do they have the ability to get him off the field, get their offense back on the field, and let them maybe be the one that kind of wears him down? But I cannot wait for this one. It's the one that I'm probably most excited for this weekend, and definitely one where just can't wait to see what Cam Skattebo can do in this one. But we got to talk about guys that can help him on the outside, and that's Kyson Brown, a very talented wide receiver for Arizona State, had 100 yards against Arizona. One of those guys that you just need to step up. One where he needs to be the guy that you're not circling on your box sheet going in, but definitely makes a lot of plays in this game. When you have someone like Jordan Tyson go down, it just has to be a guy that maybe you're not expecting, if I'm being totally honest. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Javon Robinson, a DB for Arizona State, is going to be huge in this one. All the DBs are going to be huge in this one. When you have those two wide receivers on the outside, they are problems to deal with, and you're going to have to play a little bit of double coverage. You're going to have to play a little bit of different concepts, and those DBs are going to have to make plays when they're given the opportunity. If you don't, Iowa State's going to be able to grind you down and make some big-time plays in this one. And then Carson Hansen. We talked about that Iowa State run game, not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, capable, but not necessarily elite. They're going to have to get it going one way or the other. Carson Hansen has been a factor not only running the ball, but catching the ball out of the backfield just a little bit. And we talked about the wide receiver troubles. Definitely going to be a factor in this game out of the backfield, likely catching the ball. And then finally, Joey Peterson, the DN on Iowa State, is a factor in this game, one way or the other. Sam Leavitt has done a great job this season, has done a really, really elite job. He is still a young player. He's still a guy that's going into a game that he has never played in before. He's still a guy that's without his favorite target going into this game. If they can get after him a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of mistakes from Sam Leavitt early. The keys to the game for Arizona State, just make it the Cam Skattebo show. I think we all understand that is probably the best player on the field in this game. That is probably the guy that is going to dominate this game. And he had 1,398 yards, 17 touchdowns on the ground this year. He is going to be a factor in this one. He can totally prove everyone wrong, let his team lift that trophy after being picked absolutely last in the preseason rankings for the Big 12. And then you got to keep the wide receiver duo at bay. Just keep them in front of you. It's not going to be easy to make sure these guys don't catch balls. They are going to make some plays on you. I promise that. Just make sure they don't make the big play. Make sure they don't make the game-changing play. Make sure Jalen Noel doesn't get behind you or make a play in special teams, because they're absolute issues all over the field, and they are the guys, in my opinion, outside of Cam Skattebo, that can outright take over this game for Iowa State. And then find the Tyson replacement. Someone's got to step up. Jordan Tyson's the top receiver with 1,100 yards. Cam Skattebo is the second highest receiver with 468. That can't be the way they go about business in this game. It has to be Kyson Brown. It has to be It has to be the tight end. It has to be a lot of different guys that step up in his stead. It doesn't have to be one guy in particular that gets 150 yards. It has to be a couple of guys that maybe get 50 yards, get a couple of catches, and help them move down the field. And then for Iowa State, get creative in the run game. Running in between the tackles is probably not the way that they're going to be able to win this game. Now, if they can get Rocco Becht involved in the quarterback run game, if they can get Abu Sama on the outside, if they can maybe get these wide receivers like Jalen Noel on an end around, they can do some special things. They can spread out this defense just a little bit, make them a little bit more nervous with the athletes that they have on the outside, and then make some plays possibly up the middle in the run game. Probably going to have to open it up a little bit before you do that. And then find explosives early. You have an Iowa State defense that is probably going to get worn down sometime in this game. They're probably going to get a little bit tired with having to tackle Cam Skattebo all day. The question is, if you find explosives early, you change the way Arizona State attacks this game. They have to attack through the air. They have to push the ball downfield, and then your DBs can make some plays on balls. So it's one of those things where if Iowa State can get up 14-0 in this game, I don't think Arizona State has much of a shot, if I'm being totally honest. And then finally, control the time of possession. If you can do that in this game, you're going to win. Everyone going into this game is saying Arizona State's going to control the ground. They're going to be able to run Cam Skattebo over and over and over again and just win the time of possession by 15 minutes, move on with a win. that's going to be one of those things. If Iowa State can flip that script, there's almost nothing Arizona State can do about it. They're going to have to be more aggressive on offense, and more aggressive leads to more mistakes. I think Iowa State's going to be able to get this one done. I fully agree with you, Willard. I think it's going to be an absolute battle, but I think Iowa State has enough to do it. I think these wide receivers are going to be a problem. I think the loss of Jordan Tyson is a huge thing for Arizona State and gives them a really just not a great shot to keep up with this offense, or at least shot for shot. And it'll be interesting to see if Arizona State can get that run game going early, or Iowa State makes a couple of big-time plays and totally changes the complexion of this game. But I am going to pick Iowa State. I am going to pick them to get in. We'll see what happens with a bye. If UNLV wins, I expect them to get the bye. If UNLV doesn't win, they're probably going to be that 12 seed, and we'll see what happens from there. But going to be a really interesting game, one of my favorites of the weekend, and definitely one that will decide one team's in, one team's out. Not quite like these other games that both teams could be in, even with a loss. You're in a position where one of you is going to be in, one of you is going to be out. It's all going to come down to that game on Saturday. So cannot wait for that one. But let's take our last break here. When we come back, we just got to talk about the biggest questions. As we head into the CFP, there's a lot of different things to talk about. And the biggest one for me is Alabama still Alabama? Are they the team that just needs to get into the dance and then they can make a lot of noise while they're there? We'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Big 12 championship. We actually just talked about all four of the big time championships this upcoming weekend. Going to be a huge slate of games and definitely some ones that are going to be hugely impactful for the CFP race. But let's get into that CFP race. Let's talk about the tournament that is coming up, and let's talk about the biggest questions that I have going into this one. And we'll start with Notre Dame. I want to talk about Notre Dame here really quickly, and the question I have is, can Notre Dame scale their performance? Do they have the ability to get up against a elite team like an Ohio State or like an Oregon and play at their level? Do they have the athletes on the outside to compete at that level? Because there's a couple of big-time questions that I have with this team as we get into the playoff. One of the bigger ones is Riley Leonard. I think he's a very, very capable quarterback. I worry about those big-time games. Is he able to, I don't want to say put them on his shoulders, but make the big-time plays that he's going to need to make in the pass game, in the run game? Is he able to step up to that moment the way that Notre Dame fans really want him to? Now, USC and Louisville, I think, are both good wins, as is A&M to start the year, but they lack that elite win, as does a lot of people, if I'm being totally honest, in the CFP field. Quite a few of them lack that elite win, lack that game where you can see them against another elite opponent and say, okay, they can play and they can beat these elite teams. So definitely going to be one of those things to watch with a lot of teams in this race, but I think Notre Dame might be the most aggressive of the bunch, and I think when you talk about them more than anything, it's all about that wide receiver position. Can they find the difference maker at that position one way or the other? Can they find the guy that is going to really hurt a defense downfield? Because the way I look at this team right now is if it's just going to be the run game, if it's just going to be Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, and Jeremiah Love, they're more than capable of making some plays. They're more than capable of putting pressure on defenses. They're not necessarily capable of outright winning a game against a Georgia or against an Alabama or against an elite team in this country. You got to be careful. You got to be able to find a couple of openings on the back end with Chris Mitchell, with Jaden Greathouse, with a lot of these wide receivers that are talented guys. You got to be able to push the ball downfield to them a little bit more aggressively. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this one. I think I'm skeptical of a lot of teams as we head into the CFP. That's what the 12-team playoff and expanded conferences gets you. But at this point, I think when you look at Notre Dame, I'm definitely worried about him. I think the biggest thing for me is the injury to Benjamin Morrison has shown up a lot in these big-time games, especially against USC last week. That was pretty glaring, and it will be glaring if they play in Oregon or they play in Ohio State. So I'm a little bit worried about them. I'm getting more and more bullish about Notre Dame going into this thing, but a little bit worried. I think we'll find out in a couple of weeks how much they're really ability to raise their game to an elite level. But at the end of the day, when you have this guy, when you have Jeremiah Love, you can do a lot of things wrong and still do some pretty special things offensively. So it could just be one of those things where they need a game where he just takes over. He's more than capable of doing that. One of my favorite players in the country, and definitely a guy that will have a huge impact on the CFP race. Now let's talk about Alabama. Is Alabama still Alabama? And frankly, it doesn't look like it throughout this year, if we're being totally honest. It's been a little bit all over the place. They've had the terrible performances against Vanderbilt and against Oklahoma. They've had great performances against LSU and against Georgia. So it's a battle back and forth. It's very, very hard to get an idea of what this team is and what this team can be going into this CFP race. And I think when you talk about this, there's always this era of, well, they just have to get in. If Alabama gets in, they'll find a way to get to the semifinals. They'll find a way to get to the championship. They might just win the championship, honestly. They've done it a couple of times in the 4-team, and people thought they were going to do it last year. They weren't quite able to do it. So it's kind of a complicated version. You've seen two different versions of Bama. You're wondering what happens? Which one do we get once we get into the CFP? They can play with anyone. They have that ability. When you have a guy like Jalen Milroe, you have the best athlete on the field, you're going to be able to make a lot of plays against some elite defenses. There's no doubt about that. Now, the question is, can they do that consistently? Can they make all the plays that they're going to need to make? Can they make them on a consistent basis? Because Jalen Milroe's great. I absolutely loved watching him. I think he's made some strides this year. He is not going to outright win you a game by precision passing. He is not going to outright win you a game if he's not the guy running the football. That is the way that he's a big-time factor. That's the way that he changes the game, and that's the way he's a nightmare to deal with. So it's one of those things where if Alabama's going to be Alabama, if they're going to be the team that just gets into the dance and then makes a lot of noise and beats a lot of these elite teams that people wouldn't necessarily like them against, it's pretty much going to be Jalen Milroe. It's pretty much going to be him being Superman throughout this postseason. I'd be a little bit surprised if that were to happen, but at the end of the day, they have the dudes on defense to make some plays, and they have the offense that can be explosive. I'm a little bit worried if they get into a little bit of a fist fight with some teams, but I think they're in a position where when you have that elite talent, especially when you have the quarterback, you're going to be able to do a lot of special things. I can't confirm that Alabama is still Alabama like we've known. I can confirm that they have that ability to get into the field and then get into the possible semifinals against someone and compete for a national title. Now we'll get into Oregon, and we talked about this when we were breaking down that game. Can Oregon stay mentally in the fight? This is the hardest thing all year. This is the hardest thing, especially this time of year, and usually is the decider of who wins a national title, who's on the outside looking in, is who can keep their cool, who can be the team that is more mentally focused, more mentally aware than a lot of the other teams around them. And Oregon's been one of the most impressive teams in the country, not because of their physical ability to me, not because they've been incredible at putting up a lot of points and getting to the quarterback and making plays on the back end and all of that stuff. They're mentally tough. They're one of the more mentally tough teams in the entire country. Dan Lanning brings that energy every single day, and we've seen a lot of the speeches that he brings. He definitely brings a lot of energy. There's a lot of juice into that team, and I think the biggest thing here is beyond Dan Lanning. You know you have the leadership there. Do you have it other places? Do you have Jordan James to fall back onto? Did Dylan Gabriel come in and become the leader that they were hoping he can be? Is Tez Johnson a big-time leader on this team? There's a ton of guys that need to step up in a big-time way because Dan Lanning has done a masterful job of getting this team ready to play, getting them up for games. The reality is, when it comes down to winning national titles, it comes down to the players. It comes down to the guys in those jerseys, putting those helmets on, that are going out there and working. Those are the guys that are going to have to lead you one way or the other, whether it's to a national title or on the outside looking in. That's what Oregon's going to find out over the next little bit. It seems like they have the mental toughness. It seems like they have the leadership. It's about to be tested a little bit more aggressively than it has all year. And then Ohio State. Are they done? Are they officially done? Because the question is really coming out of this game for the last 4 years has been, do they have the mental acuity to bounce back from this? Do they have the mental toughness to bounce back from this? And sometimes the answer has been yes in that Ohio State UGA game. The answer was yes. They battled pretty much that entire game. They missed by a little bit at the very end of it, obviously. But a lot of times, it hasn't been the case. It hasn't been the case where they could have walked into this game on Saturday and have flipped that switch. It's been 3 straight years where you've been embarrassed by that team. At some point, you got to flip the switch, and it's one of those things where I just haven't seen them do that in these moments. So I think they have that ability. I think they're one of those teams that has that ability to bounce back, has that ability to play elite football, has the ability to win a national title. They're also a team that I'm a little bit worried about mentally. And it's the weirdest thing to say because I'm not remotely worried about them physically. The talent on that team is undeniable. They have the most talent in the country. They have guys on the outside that are going to be absolute problems and play in the NFL for 10 years. They have one of the best running back duos in the country. A lot of things are to like about that team. That defense is absolutely ridiculous. So there's a million things to really enjoy about this team. The mental toughness is not one that I'm overly confident in right this second. I think they have the capability. Do they have the leadership that a lot of these other teams have? Do they have the toughness that a lot of these other teams have? And more than anything, do they have the offense to go along with that defense? Do they have the offense to make the plays? Do they have the quarterback to make some plays? And the defense is going to be there. There's no problem with that defense. There is going to be no problem with that defense throughout the CFP race. There could be a problem with that offense putting the defense in bad spots. So you're going to have to make sure that you kind of flush that one. You make sure that that one does not come into your vocabulary for the next 2 weeks, and you just go out, you make sure you get to work, and then get ready for whoever you're going to play. It's probably going to be Tennessee. It's going to be a battle one way or the other. If you struggle with the Michigan D-line, you're going to struggle with the Tennessee D-line. So you need to get back to work. It needs to be mental toughness. It needs to be physical toughness over the next little bit for Ohio State, or they really will be done. They really will be the team that was rolling right along, looked like they were a national title contender, and then it fell apart right when they saw that maize and blue. It's happened the last couple of years, and they got to make sure that it doesn't happen again, because you're barreling towards a very weird time in Columbus, Ohio, if you fall out in the first couple of rounds in this tournament. So a lot of things going into this one is going to be fascinating to watch this team unfold the rest of the way. And then Quinn Ewers. He, to me, is maybe the most important player when it comes to this national title race, because if he plays elite football, if he plays the football that he played in the second quarter against A&M or in the game against Michigan, Texas is going to win the national title. This team is too good on defense. They have every ability to push the ball downfield. If Quinn Ewers is making those plays, it's going to be a problem, especially with the way the run game is taken off. He's one of those guys that can really open up this thing. If he just doesn't make mistakes, if I'm being totally honest, if he just takes the play in front of him, if he makes the right play, continues to live for another down, it's going to be a really hard group to beat. You saw the A&M game. They had nothing going unless Texas was giving the ball away. Unless Texas was giving them opportunities, they were not having opportunities. So it's one of those openings where maybe that Texas defense can just take you to victory, but it's going to take Quinn Ewers not making the mistakes. It's going to take Quinn Ewers making the plays that he doesn't necessarily have to be special. He doesn't have to be the guy that totally takes over a game and goes for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns and puts up 50 points. He's got to put up 24. He's got to make sure that he doesn't turn the ball over. He's got to make sure that he has 5 yards per completion. It does not matter as long as the ball is moving downfield, as long as you are not giving the ball to the other team. This Texas team is remarkably hard to beat if they are not helping you, and it comes down to Quinn Ewers not helping the other team. He's plenty capable of doing it, but it's one of those things where a lot of things going into this one. The injury is a huge factor in this. Is he going to be able to be as mobile as he wants to? Is the defensive line is going to be able to get after him? And will he be able to handle that on the other side of it? It's going to be a fascinating player. To me, it's the most powerful player in the CFP race. If he plays the football that he's capable of playing, Texas is going to win the national title. I can almost promise you that. If he falls a little bit short, which he has a number of times this year, Texas is going to fall a little bit short, and they're going to be wondering what happened on this season. But finally, who outside of the norm could get it done? Who outside the norm could make a little bit of a run here? Because there's a lot of teams that we love to see in. You know, you love to see Arizona State or Iowa State in the thing. You'd love to see SMU or Indiana or a couple of these other teams in the dance. I don't think anyone's thinking they're going to raise the trophy. I don't think anyone's really thinking they're going to get past that first matchup. So who could possibly do that? Arizona State or Iowa State is an interesting one to watch. I did pick Iowa State in this game, so I'd be leaning towards Iowa State, but I think both have the ability to do it because both really can play clean football, non-turnover football, and can possess the ball. That are the two biggest things when you talk about an upset or these types of games. Not turning over the football and possessing the football are the two most important things. If you're able to do that, you're going to have a lot of success. Both these teams can do that, and then they both have difference makers. Arizona State has one of the best running backs in the country. Iowa State has one of the best wide receiver duos in the country. So they have the difference makers when they need them, and then they can play the bogged down, grind you out type of game that is going to be tough for a lot of these teams. SMU is the team that maybe I like the most here. I might like the next team the most, if I'm being totally honest, but I'm battling back and forth. I think Kevin Jennings' ability on the outside to make some plays with his legs, also that run game in general, and that linebacker duo on the defensive side of the ball is going to be a problem. It is going to be incredible to watch that group kind of go to work and see if they can elevate their game to a different level, and I would absolutely love to see SMU go far in this one. It's such a fun team. It's a team that I've really, really enjoyed watching this year, and frankly, could be ranked a little bit higher than they are right now. So it's going to be awesome to watch what they can do this weekend, and then going forward, hopefully, into the CFP if they don't fall out for Bama. If they do, then I'll be right on here yelling, if I'm being totally honest. But going to be an awesome team. Cannot wait to see what they can do this weekend and beyond. But then, this is the team. To me, this is the team that can make the most noise. Maybe it's not quite off the beaten path as people wanted it, but an elite D-line, an explosive offense that might just be finding it over the last couple of weeks, and then Dylan Sampson, an absolute problem. One of the best running backs in the country, a guy that can totally take over a game, and regardless of what the defensive line is on the other side, he's going to get his. He's going to make some plays. He's going to get some yards, and it's one of those things. They knock off Ohio State, then they're playing Oregon at a neutral site, and they can match Oregon in terms of physicality, or they're playing Penn State at a neutral site. Maybe they can make some plays. So they're one of those teams that I think is sitting right on the outside of that host position, probably will not get into that host position, but has the ability to walk into a different stadium, get a big-time win, and then continue rolling on. I think when you talk about Nico Imaliava and this D-line that they have, you can do a lot of special things with those two things rolling the way that they are right now. So it's going to be awesome to watch all of this unfold. We will obviously be back tomorrow to update you on just about everything. We'll get into a couple of CFP hypotheticals, let you know what happens when UNLV wins, if Clemson wins, if Oregon and Texas lose. I'll break down all the different hypotheticals, at least the way that I see it. We'll get into early signing day wrap-up, all of that craziness tomorrow. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for a little bit of a wrap-up before championship weekend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.